Hello, I am Michele Leclaire, Director at Buckham Gallery. Today, I am joined by Jon P Geiger, Curator, and artists Brian Caponi, Lindsey Dezman, and Adam Milner. Subtle Shifts brings forth a series of works that explores the artifacts of the insignificant and the mundane into a larger dialogue about time, loss, memory, decay, and vulnerability. It is on view now through May 19th. In addition to visiting the physical gallery, you may view the exhibition online on our website, buckhamgallery.org. First, I would like to thank the individuals and organizations who sponsor Buckham Gallery, including the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the National Endowment for the Arts, Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art, Genesee Grant Program, made possible by the Genesee County Arts, Education, and Cultural Enrichment Funds, your tax dollars at work. An introduction, we have today artist Brian Caponi, who lives and works in San Jose, California, considers both the large and small implications and interactions of an architectural space, object, and image, utilizing a diverse range of materials and processes. Caponi shifts and recalibrates his relationship to the histories and embedded memories of his and a human experience. His attempt is to pick up, dust off, and ingest the often overlooked and forgotten objects or spaces within life. Lindsey Dezman of Metro Detroit, Michigan, explores materials and objects as a means to understand the subtle rhythms of time, the continued creak and slumping of a front step with every season, a 1,000-year-old dinosaur bone, the dust that gathers in a house, the growth of something new. These are the pulses of life that influence her material explorations and making. And Adam Milner currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York, and draws upon personal exchanges with people, things, and institutions to examine systems of intimacy, value, and power. Involving materials and spaces that are often off limits, Adam's work exposes boundaries through a complex process of negotiation and exchange. And last but not least, the curator of our exhibit, Jon P Geiger, is an artist, curator, and head preparator and exhibitions coordinator for the Cranbrook Art Museum. His curatorial interests mirror his personal endeavors in ceramics and other materials, often drawn to work that pushes the potential of a material's nature and breaks the norm of the artistic process. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One of the things that intrigues me about this collection of works is a sense of ritual, of holding personal, the daily experience in relationships. Jon, could you tell us what brings together this group, as well as your title, Subtle Shifts?
Yeah, what brings together the work and the three artists is through a personal connection. That I've known all of these artists through one capacity or the other for anywhere from, I guess, over a decade to maybe 5 years at the minute. Maybe Brian, maybe 5 to 5 years. Yep. So and it's just sort of cured. I don't know. Their work has all been something that I've always seen as would go really nicely together. To be honest, it was like kind of a joke, and no, not a joke, is not the right word, but just sort of I always thought it would just be a fun thing to do. And I've talked to Lindsey, in full disclosure, is my wife, so I've always sort of teased with her, sort of mentioned with her, be like, oh, I think you and Brian and even Adam should do a show together. And it was always sort of like, yeah, sure, that'd be a great thing. And then I just came across like the Buckham's open call for entry thing, and just sort of was like, you know what, I'll just kind of just wanted to more or less take it upon myself to just say like, well, I keep saying you guys should have a show together, so I should just be the one to just stop saying it and actually work to facilitate it. And it just comes from, as you read in the bios, like they all explore work in a way that I think is very unique, as all artists and designers and things do. But I think what's very unique and wonderful about their three practices is that they tend to look and observe at the things that are often missed by just so many people, whether both people who are kind of in the world of observation, i.e. like artists, for example, as well as just like people going through their day-to-day life. I think they just all take note to something that we just tend to just move on past. And that's where the idea of the subtle shifts kind of come from. It's some just, I don't know exactly where I pulled that off from. Oh, I think we lost Adam for a second. But I'll just keep going. And, oh, there he's back. Anyway, the subtle shifts title just comes from, I don't know exactly where the language I pulled that from, but just this idea of just seemed like the right words. Just this, you know, for them, they're all pulling from something that's just a very slight nuance and a very slight gesture or movement, and then kind of expanding beyond that through ways of using material processes, all unique each time, which I think is a very wonderful thing too. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Brian, you know, one of the things I was really struck with, you know, looking at your work, you know, there seems to be this memory of light and place and home, you know, in the, you know, the ceramic castings, voids left. And could you really talk about this, like, personal, like, space and experience that you are sharing and how it's become this universal experience?
Oh, sure. So thank you. Yeah, thanks for first of all having us, and also yeah, some work on here that's from grad school, and then there's some, you know, so the larger chunk of clay called dunce, and there's a particular moment there, and then that was a kind of a performative thing, and then you know, this sort of tape cast of kind of blueprints of overhead views of property lines and demarcating of tracts and parcels of area of where I went to graduate school. And then this kind of void of a fence post hole that I dug actually in my parents' yard. And so there's a kind of, you know, all these kind of residual sort of ideas of, yeah, like body, and I mean, I don't know how to kind of encapsulate all of it as a kind of idea, but you know, there's definitely for me just this sort of you know, when I think about void, a lot of it is just kind of trying to kind of carry and hold on to a sort of tangibility of like I hate memory as a kind of word, but it really is, like, I don't know a better way to say it. So, you know, and that's just a lot of related to, like, you know, personal relationships. And in this, you know, there are other kind of things kind of related to specific objects, but yeah, how objects carry that sort of meaning, and then how objects carry the histories of the time and the space that they were created. So I think the, you know, the site, like the particular materials they're made from, and then also, yeah, where they're made at becomes important for me.
Yeah, I have another slide here of the other ones with, maybe you could, I was really intrigued by the window, the wall piece. Is really, it has at a moment, seems so fragile and delicate with these thin porcelain, and then just held together with the glaze, but they also, it's a powerful piece together. I don't, would you tell us more about this piece?
Sure, yeah. So this object, it's kind of a continuation of variation of these kind of screens or scrims, or kind of architectural panels that I make. And so this, you know, particular version is the size of the bedroom window that the room that I grew up in. So a lot of the work is, coming from, spaces and materials and, parts of architecture and things from my parents' house. And yeah, so this is kind of pulling from that space. And there's just a lot of fundamental kind of things in relationship to sculpture that I really like about this sort of, light and shadow and this kind of permeability of a kind of object. Also like this kind of drawn sort of shadow. And like a lot of this work came out of an interest. I lived in Japan for after undergrad. And so this sort of interest in architecture, permeability of architecture, in relationship to the Soji screen. So I was kind of playing early on with these things embedded in architectural structures and stuff like that, but they ended up just sort of becoming these kind of wall things. Yeah, so that's sort of where that's kind of coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
I like with what Brian's like say, what picking or wanting to have Brian in the show, and too. I think he and I have talked a lot about this too, and I know that you already kind of did it, but the word memory and kind of, I get what you're saying. There's sort of like, it's, for me, it's like with your work, it's not so much dealing with this idea of memory, because I think when we think about memory, we always think we pull into nostalgia in the sense of like wanting to go back there, but it's more kind of like the imprint or like the impression, the kind of remembrance of that space, less so like, I think kind of like memory and linked to nostalgia. And I think, and that's what I was like, I mean, with Brian's work in a sense of materiality, it just, there's always this lovely sense of like both the hand, but then also sort of, there's always this alchemy moment with the materials, such as like the window, the untitled window piece, like just the sort of the wonderment and how that's kind of made and created versus like the dunce piece, which has like a lot of action and force into it. But they both have this sense of like an imprint about them that just kind of reflects, I think, the sort of the ghost or the shell of where it came from. But it then becomes its own thing at the same time. And I don't know. But I also want to talk. Oh, what Brian was saying too, I think, like for all of them too, like, as Brian said, like I just had them all give me, I kind of gave everyone we ended up having a Zoom conversation because, it was like during pandemic times. And then also like, before we actually started this, when this process had started, and I wanted to do a show with these three, like Brian was here in Michigan too. So I was like, oh, all we had to worry about was getting Adam's work here. And then Brian moved, and then we were like, whoa. But then, but yeah, we sort of just figured out Brian was able to get work kind of coming this way anyways, and via the East Coast. And then I just sort of, same thing with Brian, with Adam, I did with Lindsey too. I just wanted to just sort of give me like what you can give me. And everyone gave me a lot more than I needed to work with, which is always really nice. I think in the beginning, I was going to try and put it all in the space, and then remembering what the show was kind of about and needed to be about more of these quiet moments. And it was fun to go through everyone's work and just sort of put together these pairings and relationships within either their works individually. So the show all has these kind of moments of where each of the three is sort of highlighted. And then I think as like start this table where the table image of the pillowcase and the tiles and the place setting piece, that those are part of an overall sort of a shared moment of the three coming together. Yeah. And then how, that was sort of just to kind of, centralize in the gallery and kind of unite all their works together. And also like all of these works are also ones that were like, I also asked them to send works that were maybe not quite done yet, works that they might not think as works, but are still works, and still like they're both finished but not finished. And
Well, that's
and that's kind of where
interesting.
all these three, or that's where this table sort of exists in, is like they're all kind of pieces that are, some are like ebb and flow a little bit, like Adam's work kind of always has a sort of a morph to it that doesn't want to like sit still and stay in the way. And I mean, Lindsey's piece was sort of brand new and just sort of developing, and these three works by Brian were all sort of existing as more like material kind of tests, was sort of how I saw them, or through our conversations. But
yeah, can I just say that I'm like seeing things in a new way even as you're talking, and I really love that you had us send kind of sculptural sketches almost, or sort of like material studies or in progress things, because it all, for me, it points out how the other works also are in flux too, which, like having the word shift in the title of the show, I still hadn't kind of connected that before, that I don't know, that all the works feel a little bit in flux for me.
yeah.
Well, actually, since we're on the screen, this gathering here of the three coming together on sharing a table. I mean, we have, you know, Adam's work with the like the candy boxes, which you think are these, you know, gifts to loved ones, holding these little bits of I imagine that found or other objects that bring certain maybe memories or thoughts to mind. And then you know, Lindsey's, which seems to be this study and connection to growth within, and with week by week, and Brian's there with his untitled pillowcase and the tiles, and which has the repeated shape over in the place setting and place sitting, or I think I have that backwards. Place sitting and place setting piece. It was really, I really love this coming together at a table, and you know, in a way, it's kind of like reminiscent of a dining room table where people would gather. Also, with that, it's a beautiful installation. I really think, John, you did a great job. I love the way, and I'll bring it back. That other wall that's really sets it. Nope, where was it? I'm sorry. There. With the warm walls and the way that coordinates so well with Adam's work, and it really just sets it off from the stark white of the rest, and it just really was beautifully done. Nice installation.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, a lot of that just I mean, my interest in, I mean, as you said, it's like, I mean, I've worked both as an artist. My day-to-day job is designing exhibitions and setting up exhibitions for the museum. I also like, what I wanted to get into this show too is, in the past couple years, I've started to curate more shows at the museum, at Cranbrook Museum. So I curated a solo show of the current head of the ceramics department, and then I yearly co-curate the graduate degree show, and I've done some other smaller stuff at the museum. But wanted to kind of, it was nice to work on a show with works that I was so personally familiar with because of my connections to the three. But yeah, for the Adams wall, it's just sort of just needed. It was part two is like, how do you work with these movable walls in this space, and then also what I was saying earlier, it was just like, you know, wanting to also like have like with Adam being in New York and shipping prices and things of that nature, was just sort of like, I was like, how do I get a sense of volume from Adam's pieces, but not have him like ship a ton of stuff. So we talked, and this idea of the drawings, and then this color was just,
which is part of why I make those drawings too, is so that they can like go places or not take up space.
Yeah, here, I got those.
yeah. So I mean, I just told, we were looking at doing another piece for the show, and it just both Adam and I just kind of agreed it was just going to be too kind of bananas for us to kind of coordinate and make it happen, sort of long distance and things of that nature, and me coming from the Detroit area up to Flint, And so and then we were just like, well, what, I just was like, well, just send me like as many drawings as you can from now till, like, I just need the box by this date. So just put it in, and just sent the whole catalog of the drawings, plus the boxes of stuff as well. And I didn't even use them all. And that was something we talked to, I think we could have easily filled both walls with all the drawings he sent me, but he and I both talked, I think there's also this moment of wanting to create a void within like these gaps and these pauses within his work, just as they all have already within their work. It's, it's about taking these kind of pauses in life and these moments of observation is what they all do in their practices. So I think wanting to embody that in all aspects of the show. So this is how I thought we could do it with Adam's work best too, was just to kind of have these gaps and these moments where you can just sort of, you get all the work at once, but then you kind of get these solo absorptions of everything.
I love that you call Adam's work drawings, because that's what I was really took apart with especially the, where was I? Okay, so after we met at that wedding, the cataloging of Ian's hair, that it struck me as drawings. I mean, I know like hair is so personal, and to have put it in these like document frames and presented this way, but I couldn't help but notice the way they come across as lines and thick lines and thin in the ways. So I love that you call them drawings. Would you like to tell us, Adam, more about this work or any of them?
Yeah, sure. I don't know, John, if you called them drawings because I call them drawings, or if you also were seeing them that way, but I kind of view everything as anything on paper as a drawing for me most of the time. I work in like so many different ways, so I try to give myself sometimes little restrictions. So I've been making 8.5 by 11 drawings for many years, and I like that by keeping to that format, I feel like I can just like explore a bunch of different ways to make a drawing. So I use collage and screen print and pencil and tape or whatever, and blood. And I use so many different materials and processes, but I just call everything a drawing because for me, and these works really speak to this, I think, drawing is sort of like a line made while living is one way to maybe think of it, or like a poetic way to think of it. And so I like looking at like conceptual artists who have made kind of drawings, but maybe just by like walking back and forth in the grass until it wears away, like that's a drawing. And we make those kinds of drawings without even noticing, I think. So I kind of agree with some of these. I'm not the first one to kind of talk about these kinds of ideas, but this idea that like everyone draws, even if you're like just doodling while you're on the phone, or, our footprints in the snow, like a drawing. So when I make drawings, I am kind of like thinking a lot about the movement of life, I think. And the two, like, I guess there's sort of 3 big bodies of work here, and then a few other little individual moments or like almost fragments of things. But the work Summer Catalog, for instance, which is like this pretty big collection of flowers, eyelashes, mosquitoes, butterfly wings, and belly button lint, or there's like many materials in these works, but they all happen to have somehow entered my studio one summer when I was at an artist residency. So I felt like all these things were just kind of coming to me. Like I'd show up at the studio in the morning, and because the studio is in the middle of the woods, there would just be like a butterfly wing on my studio table. And so I just started kind of collecting that little detritus, or those little signs of like life in a way. And trying to find a way to show them off. And that's kind of what a lot of these works are just their drawings as a way to show something else, whether that's showing off the hair, showing off the butterfly wings and the eyelashes, or even when I'm cutting an image out of a magazine, I don't think of it so much as like I'm using that image for my collage. I think of it kind of more as like, how can I show this image that I found that's really interesting? So sometimes I'm doing a lot of work to try to make the work not so visible, that you just can like appreciate the kind of artifact that I'm presenting. Mm-hmm. I can just tell the story kind of the work with Ian's hair. And I can also say that a lot of my materials lists end up having first names in them. And that's my way of kind of giving an acknowledgement to a person whose like body parts are sometimes literally in the work, and me trying to not let that shift into a violent territory, instead letting it stay intimate and personal, because I was making work that led friends to start just like mailing me their hair or giving me their teeth, or sometimes a simple eyelash. But I found that using bodily materials as like art materials or as any kind of material has a violent history, or it has really complicated connotations or meaning there for me. So I'm trying to do it in my own way that ends up feeling akin to like a relic for a lot of people. I don't think of it necessarily in religious terms, but more in museum terms. So I met a man at a wedding, and we like went on a canoe ride at the wedding by the lake, but I otherwise didn't really know him. And then he mailed me this hair like years later, and he's an amazing musician in Denver and like a very amazing person. But he didn't know me that well. And so this was like, when something like this happens, it's kind of a complicated gift that I sit with for a long time before I know how to handle it. And that's why I think the span is so long there, because I think we met in 2013, and then maybe I got the hair a couple years later. And so I'm just ranging it. I forget exactly what year the wedding was, but that range kind of points to the whole process of receiving the hair and then slowly framing it. And these I consider like excerpts, because this is like a very, very small fragment of how thick his head of hair was and how many panels it ends up being. It's like many, many more panels that I'm still slowly framing. You know, I've been just like framing a few here and there when I think about it. So that's that piece. It's kind of a celebration of this person, but also me dealing through that complicated bodily stuff. And then I think it's also what you pointed out. It's like thinking of how to make a drawing in a new way, or drawing a parallel between how our bodies already are drawings sometimes, or maybe parts of them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks.
I first was introduced to your work by Allison Wong in 2019. So you participated in the fieldwork exhibition at Buckham Gallery. And at that time, you know, what we exhibited was, you know, this commitment to material, in that you had dug clay bodies, different clay bodies, and cataloged them with an image and photograph. And then we had this vessel that you had made with the different clay bodies. It was fascinating. And then these pieces that we have today, you know, that John installed for us, it seems you have taken this meticulous ritual, and less in just the objects of the clay, but in the sweeping of your house. Would you talk to us about the dust plates a little?
Oh yeah, of course. And thinking about that previous body of work, or the work that was shown at Buckham, which was the Clay Archive series, these were happening at the same sort of time, but you can kind of imagine that I work in a lot of different ways, and it's really kind of project to project, and the ideas are different, but come out differently, but have a lot of kind of underlying thoughts to them. But the dust plate series, so this was from 2017 to 2018. I was sweeping our house, of course, as we all do, but I was collecting those sweepings. So I really kind of resonate with Adam in the sense of, him talking about this butterfly wing that lands on the table. But in my instance, it's the dog hair from the dog shedding, or the sawdust that's coming from John's pockets from the wood shop at the art museum, or the leaves fumbling in seasonally. And so I was, looking at the dust in our house sweepings as a really romantic sort of material, as to reflecting upon that, as to like, that's just a product of us in our domestic spaces, in our home, the home that I was sharing and continue to share with John, but and a reflection of kind of those activities that take place in the space. And so so I was collecting these house sweepings, and then throwing these plates. These are ceramic plates, and then burning out those house sweepings on top of the plates. And so as a way of cataloging the activities within a home, but also kind of removing it somewhat from that context and leaving this imprint of those activities and the sentiments towards my home and who I share my home with. And so that's really what this series does and how it functions for me. And I like it because, I mean, the plates, the more sweepings you had, depending upon seasonally what was happening, left more of an imprint on the plates themselves. So you get this nice sort of rhythm from one plate to the next, that really, I think, kind of illustrates, but also it encapsulates time, but it really doesn't, in a sense too. It does that, I think, more so for me, but then as a viewer, it doesn't, I don't know, it's so removed from that, in a sense too, that it functions in this different sort of realm with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really, the markings are beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
What I've always enjoyed about this piece, I mean, too, is like Lindsey's done with this work too, is there's a reference to kind of the history of commemorative plates within the ceramic industry. But unlike, I mean, she could have taken just, like a slip, could have done like a reproduction plate of the same plate, and, did this burnout effect on the exact same plate and have that be the different, but like, there's also this nice moment of that, like each plate is a different size and different, so there becomes this matching and this finding of like sort of a unique hand thrown vessel to or dinnerware piece to then like this week's sweeping, and how those two sort of items come together. I always have liked and enjoyed in this piece. That's the thing I always like. So because some of them, it like allows like these like ones where the sweepings were super heavy, they needed like this bigger plate, and then it just like it becomes super explosive and kind of a larger canvas for the works, and the smaller ones, just sort of the pinpoints and the dots of just, I guess, a lesser week, or somehow the dogs were not. This is all during this year, as we only had one dog, so that was a big. It'd be interesting to see these actually now with the two dogs, but
yeah, it would be totally different. And thank you for bringing up the platform, the plate, which I did not even mention, but that touches upon it. And I mean, people have been decorating plates on their walls for a long time, and I think it functioned in a way of kind of making painting as a decoration on the wall a little bit more accessible, instead of like obtaining a painting or purchasing a painting, you could buy ceramic plates that also were decorative, but a little bit more accessible. But yeah, yeah.
I also have another slide of these pieces. We have, I don't have a good picture of the drawings, but I love, because they were behind glazing and that doesn't make good for a good photograph, unfortunately. But I loved the swollen grass seed or grass clippings that you had collected and traced on the drawings. And then paired with your hose and the hydrangea. And then of course the week by week piece, which was mentioned before. If you have anything you can, what brought you to these pieces?
Yeah, of course. So these, within the exhibition, there's really kind of 3 bodies of work. We have the dust plates, and then the hydrangea and hose, as well as the drawings of the grass, were done when I was in a residency in Norway, and I was reflecting upon my home again, thinking about home, thinking of, being a little homesick, and just reflecting upon the importance of what that means to me. So that was, the drawings were done at that residency. And so there are a series of drawings that kind of look at or think about the yard that we have, and kind of the areas in which our dogs have destroyed the yard. So there's areas, of course, that the dogs have the grass is bare and non-existent. And, as Adam was talking about grass as a drawing, our dogs are very busy drawing in our backyard, deteriorating the grass, but then also our yard also had these low points into it where it would flood every year. And so just kind of thinking back upon these incidences and spending so much time in the garden, because that's really where I spend so much time outside in the yard. So I made this series of drawings, and this is just a few of them of the grass, but I also made other drawings of objects within the yard, of a hose, which is the image on the left, and then the hydrangea bloom as well. And so those 2 clay pieces I made after the fact when I returned back from Norway back here, kind of retranslating those drawings into actual physical ceramic objects. And so there's definitely a large component of material exploration within my practice, but also this interest in recreating objects. And yes, abstracting them, simplifying them, as in the case of the hose, or this hydrangea bloom is actually much larger, and so kind of scaling up on it. I think there's this really nice sort of intimate interaction that can happen when you're choosing to recreate something that exists, and spending that time doing it. You learn more about that object, more about your interest within it, and your relationship to it. But then week by week is a new development. So I'm currently 6 months pregnant. And so week by week is me reflecting upon being pregnant. So gestationally, our second child is growing each week. And so each of those weeks is symbolized by a different produce item. And so kind of seeing this growth physically, like I'm now remaking these produce items. So we have like a yam and an onion there. There's an avocado, a mango, and it sizes all the way down to a pea and a seed. But it's just a way of me kind of understanding size and this growth of this new being that's in me, but also kind of reflecting and trying to establish that relationship that's just budding from me and now this child that I'm growing. And so that's what week by week is it's a little bit more, because it's now an establishment of a relationship with something else that the other works don't quite have. It's the other works really kind of are a reflection upon materiality or a space, or materials within a space that's a product of people. But this one's a little bit more personal. And so, and reflecting upon the current now, which is a complicated, sort of development. Being pregnant is a whole other thing, and this is a way of reflecting upon it for me right now.
Well, it made me immediately, even before I knew the title, it made me think of those pregnancy magazines, because they have and now your baby is a strawberry, and now, and the way they help you relate to it and trying to build those relationships and understanding what is happening in the growth. So I was like, that makes a lot of sense to be sort of, and of course I have imagined you doing this one each week as you are, in that stage of, without knowing this for a fact, but.
Yeah, and that's what I was doing. So I was making these each week, and I was referencing that context in which you're talking about of like, this is how these pregnancy, magazines or websites or anything, they kind of is like, oh, your baby is this size. And so I was doing that week by week. And so all of these encompass up until the exhibition opened. So that's where the baby was growing up until that point. But it's also interesting too, because like this is my second pregnancy. And so our first child, like I had no interest in wanting to know the size in relation to what was going on. But this time I've been much more interested into it. And so it's just kind of a reflection upon, I'm different this time. And that relationship is being established differently, which I think is an important thing for me as well.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. I know I touched on it a little bit earlier about, these containers that we often, would present to someone special. And would you talk about maybe these collected tile bits and these other precious objects, like from like dried mango seeds and bones that you have collected together, and if there's anything more you might want to share?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Like John mentioned earlier, in my case, these are sort of material archives or object collections or kind of sketches for me. But I liked the idea of presenting them as works, or, giving them that kind of like attention and space, because I've been, I work from home, I should say, as many artists do, but it's always been very important for me to have my studio in my living space. So these boxes are a byproduct of me trying to organize my life when like art will take over or the objects start to take over. And I'm very like, people think of me, I think, as a collector, but I also have this like fear of the objects taking over. And I think a lot about hoarding in my practice. And I actually kind of like, I make work in defense of the hoarder. I think it's, I'm not going to get into all of that, but I do think, I know how things can take over. And it points to, I think, part of this show that things are active, I think, is like part of what I'm seeing in this work across the show. So for me, I'm just like afraid of objects. So the boxes are a way of kind of containing them, making them maybe beautiful, making this kind of pleasurable moment of opening a box and not knowing what's in it. So these are very much just like a part of my life. And in that way, the items collected aren't trying to like tell a specific story or make a specific argument. They're just objects from my life that I somehow am finding like kinships among them. Or, the heart-shaped box is the most obvious one just because everything's red. But then the other box, it's harder to define why these things are there, and I kind of like that. I like to collect items, but without rigid boundaries. Like unlike the stamp collector or the memorabilia collector, I like to collect things without knowing where the collection is headed. and without the collection being able to be pinned down. But that doesn't mean it's random. Like some of these items are really sentimental. Some of them I love for their design. Some of them I can't explain it, but they like do something to me, right? And so that's what all these things are kind of doing. And then I use so many found items in my sculptural work that these are kind of the things that end up becoming displayed in the way that we talked about the hair and the butterfly wing. It's like these items might end up informing an entire sculpture, or one little object in that heart-shaped box might inform an entire exhibition. Like, I'm not sure what they're doing yet. And so this was sort of just my opportunity to kind of share some of these little objects that for whatever reason I've been drawn to. And then I'm like augmenting the boxes in some cases, or some of these objects I've made. So there starts to be a little bit of slippage of whether it's just a found collection or whether I'm making things. And I like kind of showing those on an even plane, like no hierarchy there. And
it was kind of interesting how you said that was a certain fear of object, when these are seem so much about the object and almost an intentionality in putting them together.
Yeah, that's good to point out. There probably are a lot of contradictions in the way I feel about the things around me, but I think what you're seeing and pointing to is that as I like find objects in the world and try to display them through my art practice, I realize that something I'm doing when I pull from like retail display and museum display and home display, like the china cabinet or something. When I start to reference all these spaces, I'm kind of thinking through like what care looks like, or what's an aesthetic of care. And then I try to sort of perform that or practice that with the items. And then sometimes they end up feeling so cared for that it gets into like I look very attached to these things, and sometimes I am, and I definitely become attached by the end of whatever I'm doing with them. But I think they also feel kind of romantic or sweet, like maybe generous, because I'm thinking about about the people who will encounter them, I guess. It's like just a little present. A lot of the work I've been making lately feels like little gifts. And so showing off these boxes was just like a really easy way to kind of keep thinking about the artwork as like a gift.
Yeah. On that note, Adam, and like in advance of this, which Brian had sent me like templates to install his works. I mean, Lindsey and I were easily able to kind of figure out the conversations of how to install it. But like Brian had sent me texts of images of how these all go, and I just like, I saw them and I just like opened the text and then just was like, I don't want to look at these, because there was also like I think 3 more that he sent out too, and I wanted that moment of opening each one to then just sort of be like, okay, this is the, like, because I knew where this was coming from, this sort of this to kind of be on the reverse of Adam's work and sort of experience this connection of a gift essentially. And that's like, because there is this I've known Adam for well over a decade, and there's this amazing aura about him that people just want to give him things, all sorts of weird things, and he does,
and I'll take them.
He takes them, and he does really great things. So it was really wonderful for me, I think, in the curatorial moment to kind of receive some of this, and then kind of go in, I think, that reverse sort of sense of gift giving. So Brian took up like the majority of the van to like get of when I delivered everything. And I went through so much, and it's like, and everything is labeled like like much in the way, like also like how I was just like box, and I'm like, and I would just like open box and see what's in there, and then you're like, and so for me, what I loved with Brian, same thing with like, you know, Adam's work too, was like trying to just like find that the connection in the moment. So these tiles, I just was like, oh, these are perfect. There was like, you know, they had this, I mean, the celadon glaze is just from ceramic people nerd, like it just was a perfect sort of glaze test tile, but the tiles themselves had sort of unique nuances in them, and I just was like, I don't know what these are about, but these are going right here, because just sort of something in them.
A surprise, and yeah, it was really nice to see those, because yeah, they are kind of a lost project that actually was sort of in collaboration with my dad, which is pretty pretty interesting. So they are cast, so they're, you know, cast porcelain, and I made well, I had molds made, so I brought a series of machined parts. My dad's a machinist, and so he had kind of like taken a bunch of scrap parts from his shop, and so I had kind of taken some of those with me on a trip to Dezman, to China, and sent them through the process of having mold made and then cast, and then glazed. And yeah, these were just sort of, you know, sketches and things that I was kind of working through in terms of like some collaborative kind of project of, you know, assemblage and building with yeah, more mold, or, you know, designing stuff with him. But yeah, so those were sort of made in Dezman, and then yeah, kind of brought back. And so they've just sort of been kind of traveling around with me, and yeah, so they have, and then, you know, the reason I brought them, there's a it's kind of a longer story, but, you know, the tradition of the craftsmanship, so it's kind of handmade versus automated sort of systems of making, and so anyway, in Dezman, there's all this kind of divided labor in the way of production, and so you can kind of team up with that as an artist. You don't have to be a ceramicist. You can just sort of go with the drawing of whatever you want, and hey, and there's a, you know, a person to make the model you want out of plaster or clay. They send it on to the mold maker. They send it on to the caster, and you literally don't have to touch anything if you know, if you're not inclined to. So it's just this really kind of amazing place. Incredibly long history in ceramics, and so yeah, and then also just thinking about this kind of handmade kind of part of this automotive tradition here in Detroit, or there in Detroit. Yeah, so that was kind of part of this sort of inner dialogue, you know, this conversation. But yeah, so those things kind of, yeah, it was, so there's a kind of texture to them that's from that machining. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I guess I've sort of landed on, like this, like, you know, we talk about that, the mundane and kind of reflecting. This sort of like the potency of like the present is sort of really, I think, you know, how we're all kind of paying attention to like what the qualities of certain kind of like if it's in the subtlety of like how we might sort of, you know, like what Adam's describing as like what that intuition of like a relationship is between an object. And then also like, yeah, so I don't know what that, like how you, I'm not sure why, but that interconnectedness between objects, our relationship to objects, also like our own relationships, but how that is all kind of seaming together through our being, right? But also like being in the show, right? So it's been awesome to hear more about like everyone's individual work, because yeah, that kind of connecting the themes and seeing, and yeah, it's really awesome. Anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to kind of say that and acknowledge that, because yeah, I've always, like, just seeing the work was like, oh yeah, and then to have the conversation just really, yeah, it's been awesome.
That's been, been one of the great things that's come out of the pandemic for us, all of a sudden, this not being able to have in-person events, I'm actually reaching a lot more of our artists with these Zoom conversations, and being able to then, learn more and have a greater conversation about the work, and then share that with a much wider audience through YouTube. So, it's actually, there have been some bright silver linings, I guess. So thank you all. John, did you have any last words before I?
No, I mean, I just, as I already said, I just want to say thank you to everyone. I mean, thank you, Michelle, for letting the space, and just kind of, and then the three, Lindsey, Adam, and Brian, for just just kind of letting me take control and just run with this, and have some curatorial fun with all three. They're also very, you all are very close and dear to me. So it was really wonderful to, I said in the beginning that this is kind of, as started as just like, I think you guys should all show together. So it's been fun to facilitate this and to see it into an actual physical embodiment of an idea. And I think I don't know, they all go so great together, and I enjoyed the conversation, hearing them talk about their works.
I greatly appreciate you joining me today and sharing your work with our Flint audience and greater region area. So thank you.
Thank you so much.